Thank you for tuning in. You are listening to It's All About Becoming the podcast, and I am your host, Megan Alexandria. Welcome back to It's All About Becoming. I'm really glad that you're here, and I want to thank you for taking the time to listen. Whether this is your first episode or you've been here for the past few weeks, before we get into today's conversation, I do want to say thank you for your support. So if you are listening on YouTube, please make sure that you're subscribed so you don't miss future episodes. And if you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartMedia, Amazon Music, or anywhere else, subscribing and leaving a rating truly helps more than you know. Now, as we get into this episode, as you can probably tell from the title, we're talking about singleness. And I know you didn't think I was going to close out this year without addressing this, especially as we look ahead into 2026 and the kind of mindset that we're carrying with us. So, if you're going into 2026 single, this episode is for you. Not because singleness needs to be fixed, but because how you think while you're single matters more than what most people realize. And listen, I'm not here to tell you that 2026 is the year that you're going to be found. I'm not going to make those kind of promises. But what I will say is that 2026 can be one of the best years of your life, whether you're married or not. And that outcome has a lot more to do with how you position yourself than your relationship status. And as someone who is single, I've learned not to allow singleness to become my entire identity. And that realization is what led me to this conversation today. Because singleness is not who you are, it's a status. And when we confuse the two, we start carrying expectations, pressure, and narratives that were never meant to define us. And that's where I want to begin today. Your singleness is not your identity, it's a relationship status, one that can change at any time. And that distinction matters more than we tend to admit because the moment singleness becomes who you are instead of the season that you're in, it starts shaping how you think. It will shape how you choose, how you make decisions, and how you present yourself. You will begin to filter your life through what's missing instead of what's being formed. You start postponing decisions, joy, growth, and movement because you have attached them to a future version of yourself instead of the person that you are right now. And before we talk about dating, relationships, or marriage, we have to get this part clear because how you see yourself while you're single will determine how you move in every relationship that follows. Now, I am going to challenge you on this idea that has been going around that I have been hearing so many people say. People say it on social media. I've heard people say it in real life. Heck, at one point, I was even saying it. This is an idea that after I've thought about it, it kind of explains a lot of the relationship troubles that we do see. And so this idea, it gets attached to singleness, and it's the phrase that you are the prize. Now listen, please don't be mad at me. Let's just keep an open mind as we have this conversation because on the surface, it sounds empowering. But when you slow it down and you really begin to examine it, that language alone starts to create a mindset that does not help you. A prize implies a competition. It implies winners and losers. It implies performance, comparison, and being chosen. And when you carry that thinking into relationships, even unintentionally, you place yourself inside of a competition that doesn't exist. You start competing for attention. Now you're competing for time. Now you're competing for validation. Now, instead of discerning alignment, you are performing. And instead of observing for this person's character, now you're auditioning. And instead of moving with a clear mind, now you're trying to manage perception. So that mindset creates pressure where there doesn't need to be any pressure. And pressure is not the same thing as purpose, no matter how good it may feel in that moment. Listen, you were never meant to be one. You were meant to be aligned. And that difference matters as we talk about how to move into 2026 with discernment. There's a verse that gets quoted often when we hear the conversation about marriage, and it's Proverbs 18 and 22. He who finds a wife finds a good thing and obtains favor from the Lord. But that verse doesn't exist in isolation, as a standalone verse in that chapter. Proverbs 18 as a whole is about speech, relationships, wisdom, pride, and consequences. It warns against isolation. It speaks about rash words and foolish decisions. That placement matters. This proverb is not saying that marriage automatically brings God's favor. It's saying that recognizing a good covenant partner reflects wisdom, and wisdom tends to align with God's order. So, in other words, the favor isn't caused by marriage. The marriage reflects discernment that already exists. And that's important because it shifts the focus. The goal isn't just marriage, the goal is wisdom, the goal is alignment. The goal is choosing relationships that support a life ordered towards God, which leads to a deeper question that we don't always ask ourselves while we're single, which is, what kind of wisdom does it take to recognize a good thing when it's in front of you? And the reason I pose this question to you is because we know that there is wisdom from everywhere, not just godly wisdom. There's wisdom that comes from our family. There's wisdom that comes from our friend groups. There's wisdom that comes from social media. There's wisdom that comes from the people that we look up to. And I truly believe that as we go through life, that sometimes when we are trying to find our path, when we're trying to figure out our life, that we take on bits and pieces of all of the things and the people that are around us, and then we begin to apply those things to our lives. But the problem is that when we apply someone else's wisdom to our life and it's not aligned with our life, now we're upset because that worked for them, but it didn't work for us. And so now we're mad and we're upset because we're like, I did exactly what you said to do, but yet they were following a wisdom that was aligned for their path and for their purpose and for their life. And so I think it's really important that as singles that we are making sure that everything that we do in life is aligning. Every decision that we make, that it is aligning, but it's aligning with God's purpose. And I'm going to say that over and over again because it's true. And when we look at Proverbs 18 through this lens, it really becomes clear that moving towards marriage is not about rushing the outcome, but it's about cultivating the kind of wisdom that can recognize alignment when it appears. And as we look towards 2026, there are three things that matter more than any strategy, timeline, or expectation. The first one is discernment. The second one is covenant alignment. And the third one is choosing relationships that support a life ordered towards God. Those three things are going to shape every decision that we make, who we entertain, who we invest in, and who we walk away from, and who we give access to our future. Listen, relationships don't just add to your life. They're either going to reinforce order or they're going to introduce disorder. And wisdom helps you tell the difference. Now, before we go further with this, let me just tell you guys a really quick story because if you are new to following me, you're going to find out that I love being transparent because I'm learning that everything that I've been through in my life, I have gone through it so that way I can help someone else. So, there was a relationship that I was in. Before I got into the relationship, I prayed and I asked God. I asked God to reveal this person's character, to reveal this person's heart. I asked God to give me all of the signs. And let me tell you something. God spoke something to me that I will never, ever forget. I remember God telling me that this relationship is going to be a beautiful disaster. And when God said it to me, it really caught me off guard because on the outside, it appeared that this was it. And so when God spoke this to me, I said, Lord, I said, why? I immediately became defensive and I became upset. And I was really mad that I even asked God about this because I was like, Lord, I've been waiting. I've been waiting. What could possibly go wrong? And so I disobeyed and I entered into the relationship anyway. And when I tell you that exactly what God said happened, it happened. And I was so hurt. But then years later, because listen, we grow, we learn, we grow. Well, you should learn and you should grow. And so as I grew and as I matured, I was meditating on it one day and God brought back to my remembrance that He told me that that relationship was going to be a beautiful disaster before I got into it. And I kept asking God, okay, can you just help heal my heart, heal my heart? And for me, it wasn't until I had to remember, okay, He told me not to even get in this relationship. And I disobeyed. So I had to then repent and ask for forgiveness. I was able to allow healing to actually take place because a part of me was wanting some type of vindication for what I went through. And the lesson that I learned from this entire experience was that I had to submit my need for marriage, or not my need. I had to submit my desire for marriage and relationship to God. Because in that moment, when God spoke that to me and I disobeyed, I allowed my desire, my want for marriage to override God's word. And this is where the conversation becomes less about finding someone and more about who you are being in that moment. Because this is one of the healthiest mindset shifts that you can make as someone who is single. Because who you are being is a direct reflection of the environment that you are building. And whatever environment that you are in right now is the environment that you are going to take into a marriage. You have to remember that marriage does not suddenly transform you into a new person. So, if you desire to have a marriage of peace and stability and emotional maturity, start cultivating that today, not later. And during this time, I also believe is where you will be able to set the tone for you being wanted and not just needed. And I'm not saying that a husband and wife will never need each other, because covenant does create a healthy interdependence. But that kind of need is mutual and it's rooted in honor and partnership. The need I'm warning against is when someone attaches themselves to you because being with you fills a void in them, not because they value your character or see a future with you, but because you serve a purpose for their insecurity. You serve a purpose for their loneliness. You serve a purpose for their ego. That kind of need drains you. But an environment where someone wants you is completely different. When someone truly wants you, it's because they recognize the environment that you have already built, your peace, your wisdom, your growth, and they choose it. And as you cultivate that environment, it sharpens your discernment so you can see the difference. But now we have to talk about a hard truth when it comes to embracing singleness. You know, one of the major things that can disrupt discernment is assuming that every person you meet is going to lead to a romantic relationship. Not every single person you come across is your potential spouse. And learning this is going to matter for a lot of people. Some people are meant to just be your friend. Some people are meant to be companions for a certain season of your life. Some people are meant to sharpen you, to challenge you, or walk alongside you without becoming anything more. When you treat every interaction like a possibility, then you create an unnecessary amount of pressure, and pressure makes it harder to see people for who they are. Discernment requires space, and part of that space comes from releasing the expectation that every relationship has to turn into something else. I will never forget years ago, I was at church one day and I was cleaning up and I began praying. And God began to speak to me. And He said that one of the things that I needed to pray for at that time was I needed to pray for single women. And He told me to pray that single women would see men as His son before seeing them as their husband. And this is why what I said in the beginning is so important, that you have to make sure that singleness is not your identity. Because when singleness becomes your identity, then you begin to view every man that you come across from the lens of, this is my husband. And what happens is when you have that type of mindset, before you can even qualify if he's even supposed to be in your life, you've already established him as your husband. You haven't even spoken to him. You haven't even figured out what he believes in, what kind of character he has. You don't know his background. You don't know his future. You don't know what his plans are. But because you're single and he's single, then you automatically assume, could this be a potential? This is where friendship becomes essential. There are people who want marriage but have never learned how to be a friend to anyone. And that gap shows up later in ways that they did not expect. You need to learn how to have friendships. You need to learn how to build connection without romance attached to it. You need to learn how to relate to the opposite sex in a healthy, platonic way without immediately assigning that role of spouse. You see, friendships teaches communication, it teaches boundaries, it teaches emotional maturity. And if someone struggles with friendship, marriage will only magnify that struggle. Friendship is not a detour from marriage, but I truly believe that it's part of your preparation. I truly believe that for most people, not everyone, but for most people, that a lot of the failed relationships that you've been through, you went through that simply because that person was not supposed to be your spouse. That person was not supposed to be in a romantic relationship with you. You were supposed to be friends. And I believe this because even when I look back at some of my relationships, I can tell the ones where we were meant to only be friends. Our friendship was so good, and our friendship actually produced fruit when our relationship did not. And this leads into the next tip for us singles. Stop postponing your life because you're single. You know, for a long time, I had this exact thought that I will do this when I get married, or I was going to postpone doing this until I had a spouse. And let me tell you something, I can say this with confidence right now today, that me thinking that way, it caused me to delay my life. It caused me to stop experiencing life in the way that I wanted to. Listen, marriage is not a guarantee with a timeline attached to it. In the same way that we don't know the day or the hour when Jesus will return, it is the same way with marriage. We don't know the day or the hour when that moment is going to happen for us. So you cannot put your life on hold waiting for a moment. Do the things that you want to do today. Build what you want to build today. Experience life fully where you are. Singleness is not a waiting room. And I know that we have been conditioned to think that because we have been told over the years that it's our waiting season and we have to wait. But singleness is not the waiting room where you just sit and do nothing. You have to understand that what you do during your singleness, it matters. And it's either going to be beneficial to your marriage or it's going to sabotage your marriage. This is why cultivating relationships is so important, because during your time of being single, one of the most important things that you can do is hang around married couples. And not just any married couples, but you need to hang around couples who have a healthy marriage. And when I say healthy, I do not mean perfect. I mean couples who have sustained things, couples who have went through things, couples who can talk to you about what for better or for worse really looks like. And of course, we know that every marriage is not going to be the same. And what one couple goes through, you will not necessarily go through it. But the beauty in this is as you are hanging around these marriages, it's going to give you the opportunity to get strategic insight on how marriage actually works. And it may even make you be a little grateful for the fact that you are single. Even when it comes down to your single friends, you need to surround yourself with single friends who are content with being single. And you also need to surround yourself with single friends who also desire marriage because guess what? That's going to help give you that balance. The next thing that you need to do during your time of being single is really be honest with yourself. You need to decide what kind of marriage you actually want. So, if you want a 50-50 type of marriage, then you need to be clear on that. If you want to be with a man who is a provider, then you need to be clear on that. If you desire traditional roles, then you need to be clear on that. When you're unsure about what you want, you're more likely to accept what doesn't align with your life. But when you're sure, your decisions become simpler, even when they're not easy. Knowing what you want helps you discern who fits and who doesn't without needing to explain or defend yourself. But one of the major factors for singles as we move into 2026 is really learning how to trust. And when I say trust, I want to be very clear. I'm not saying to date without boundaries or wisdom, but when I say trust, I mean don't be afraid to date. Trust yourself in the process of dating. Don't be afraid to meet people. Don't be afraid to have conversations with people. This also means being open to dating outside of your preferences, but you're still going to honor your standards. You see, the type of man that you want, the type of godly man that you want, is never going to ask you to do or say or act or do anything outside of the standard of God. And if he is asking you to do things outside of the standard of God, then that is your sign that that's not the one for you. And listen, I learned early on in life that sometimes that list that we put together about this perfect person that we want to be with is sometimes the thing that's really holding you back from even getting married in the first place. Because sometimes we actually put limits on the life that we want because we'll say we want this, and this. And if the person doesn't check off every single thing, then we don't want it. When that's possibly not even the type of man that God wants you to even be with in the first place. I'm going to tell you guys something. So I had a list and I met someone who checked off every single mark on my list, every single thing. And when I met this person, and I realized that me and him were not compatible, the first thing I said to God was, God, I clearly do not know what I want for my life. And so this is why it's really important. Yes, we can have our preferences. There's nothing wrong with that. But you also need to think about what state of mind were you in when you made those preferences? What state of mind were you in when you made that list? The person I was when I made my first list is I'm not that same person now. I've grown, I've matured. So therefore, because I've grown and I've matured, the type of man that I want now was not the type of man that I wanted even a few years ago. So I threw my list out a long time ago. I don't even have a list anymore. What I have now written down when it comes to marriage is I have things written down that pertain to me. I tell God what kind of wife I want to be. I ask God, what kind of wife should I be? And I make a list of those types of characteristics so that way I have something that I can hold myself accountable to. Because I truly believe that when God sends my husband and my husband does find me, then like kind is going to recognize like kind. He is going to already be holding himself to a certain standard, and he's going to recognize and discern that I am holding myself to that same type of standard and caliber of woman that he wants. If marriage is something that you desire, the first thing is to learn submission. And this is for both men and women because the Bible does say to submit yourselves one to another. So submission is something that happens on both ends, not just on one side. But what does submission look like? as a single person right now? Well, right now, if you attend a church regularly, submission looks like submitting to your leaders. If you have a singles ministry, submission looks like submitting to your singles ministry leader, submitting on your job, submitting to your family, submitting to your friends. This is why relationships is important, because one of the key factors of a good relationship is submission on both ends. Another way that you can position yourself going into 2026 is to study love, study marriage. So read books on marriage, and not just the cute, fun, lovey-dovey books, but also read books about divorce, because you need to know why people are getting divorced. You see, we think about preparation and we just think about all of the fun stuff, all of the good stuff, getting in shape and, knowing how to cook good and making sure that we look good and making sure that we know how to say the right things. But we also need to understand the other side of marriage, because those wedding vows say for better or for worse. So you also need to study and understand what are the possibilities of worse. And that actually leads me into this next point of make sure that you are already preparing an environment of prayer. You should already be praying for your spouse as if you already know who that person is. Whether you are in a relationship or whether you are not in a relationship, if marriage is something that you do desire, then prayer needs to be one of your key components to your preparation, for lack of better words. And even though I've never been married, I have been around enough married couples to know that if there's anything that I need to make sure that I am skilled in, it's in the art of prayer. And then you need to ask an important question. Ask yourself why you want to be married, and really sit with that question and really ponder it and think about it, because your reason is going to matter. And your reasons will reveal whether marriage has become an idol or if it's a actual desire that God has put in your heart. We have to remember as singles that marriage is not meant to complete us, but marriage is meant to complement a life already ordered towards God. And finally, don't be afraid of therapy. Please do not wait until marriage to start doing that type of work. Begin on that now. Begin on that healing now. Begin on the process of mending your heart and your mind now. Healing before marriage is wisdom. Self awareness before marriage is wisdom. And choosing your mental health now protects what you're praying for later. Listen, guys, this brings us to the end of today's episode, and I would love to hear your feedback. Please give me your feedback in the comments below, whether you are listening on YouTube or whether on one of the other platforms. I love reading everything that you guys say. Also, don't forget to share this episode. You can share the YouTube link or you can share one of the links on wherever you are listening to this podcast, whether it's Spotify, iHeartMedia, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or whatever platform you are listening on. And if there is a particular topic that you would like to hear, please feel free to let me know in the comments as well. Because remember, this podcast is meant for you that's listening. Make sure you have your notifications turned on so that way you know when a new episode drops on next Thursday. And until then, see you later, friends.